Hello, today we'll be discussing renewable energy in developing countries. This presentation is given by
My name is AJ Lehman.
I'm Kayla Gorlushin
and Sarah Gurman.
Throughout our presentation, we will be discussing the current statistics of some certain developing countries. We will also discuss the importance of this topic, how it can be developed, and some specific examples and future projections from different countries. Here are the current statistics of 4 separate countries. Kenya generated 7.6 million megawatt hours of electricity in 2012. 68% of this came from renewable sources and 32% from oil. They rely most heavily on hydroelectric and geothermal. However, only 18% of the population has access to this energy. Morocco uses roughly 25.4 million megawatt hours of electricity. 70% of this comes from fossil fuels, 20% from hydroelectric plants, and only 4% from renewable technology. South Africa has 90% of its electricity coming from coal-fired power plants. India has an energy consumption percentage coming from 55% coal, 29.9% oil, 8.5% natural gas, 5.6% hydroelectric and 1% nuclear energy. It is estimated that 1.3 billion people do not have access to electricity. Because of this, many countries are beginning to add more technology to provide electricity. The problem is that many countries are looking at fossil fuels because of the cheap price, but this will only add to more carbon emissions. The graph to the right shows the difference among a few countries with statistics on their electrical usage and the population of people. This graph shows the total primary energy supply of the world. As can be seen, oil, coal, and natural gas make up most of the supply, and the amount used has only grown in recent years. The units are in megatons per oil equivalent.
Renewable energy can have a huge impact on developing countries. If countries add renewable sources, it can positively affect the economy of the country, the environment, health of its citizens, and the social issues in the country. Most underdeveloped or developing countries are dependent on other countries for their energy, and having renewable sources allows for more independence. Having these renewable sources, such as wind and solar, also creates skilled jobs for citizens. Moving away from carbon-emitting sources of energy has a positive impact on the environment. If renewable sources are implemented, rivers and lakes will experience less pollution and cities near existing power plants will not be covered in smog. Most cooking and heating in developing countries is done by burning biomass such as wood and animal dung in the house. This can cause disease, and around 4 million people die each year from illnesses relating to burning biomass. This can be avoided if countries use renewable sources to provide electricity for cooking or use solar thermal for heating. Most areas in developing countries do not have access to energy because there are no large grids implemented in the country. Adding renewable energy can create microgrids, which can supply energy to rural areas. By having electricity in these areas, water can be purified easier, and it also allows for improvements in farming. Currently, women and children spend a lot of their time collecting biomass for heating and cooking. If renewable energy sources provided energy for these activities, it would allow a movement for equality for women and children, and would also allow children more time to go to school.
Renewable energy sources are better options for developing nations than non-renewable energy resources. This is because rural countries are especially abundant in wind and solar resources. Most developing countries are in places that are optimal locations for absorbing the sun's rays. Renewable energy resources can be placed on microgrids instead of the nationwide grids found in developed countries. These microgrids are easier for developing countries to handle. How do we implement renewable energy in developing nations? For starters, existing power grids would need to be updated to integrate power from solar photovoltaic cells, wind turbines, and other renewable energy resources. Some organizations are already in place to begin implementing renewable energy sources in developing nations. One of these organizations is Solar Energy International, or SEI. This organization educates and trains people that are involved with solar technologies and also plans and engineers sustainable projects. There are quite a few challenges to implementing renewable energy into developing nations. The infrastructures required for renewable energy systems create a high capital cost which poorer nations cannot afford. Most developing nations would require major investments from outside nations to cover the capital costs. These high costs are balanced, however, by the benefit of renewable energy sources in relation to the economy. They would create a sustainable energy source as the primary source of energy for these developing nations. Senegal is a little country in southern Africa. Research has recently been done to figure out how much renewable energy could best be implemented in Senegal. The study showed that small wind turbines would be a good source of local energy because it would be cost effective for the next few years. Wind and solar would both have the same levelized electricity cost in Senegal. By levelized electricity cost, we mean that the net present value of the unit cost of electricity. Solar PV would be good for Senegal because it would convert the sun's energy directly into electricity. Although energy for solar PV cannot be stored yet, research shows that it would be the best way to deal with poverty in underdeveloped countries. This is a chart of the amount of each source of energy used in Senegal from 1972 to 2014. You'll notice Senegal peaked at only using around 4,000 kilotons of the oil equivalent of energy. This is not very much energy. Currently, this limited energy comes mostly from biofuels and oil. Kenya is a great example of a country that is leading the charge for renewables as primary sources of energy. In 2012, it generated 7.6 million megawatt hours of energy. The leading renewable energy sources in Kenya are hydroelectric and geothermal energy. In addition to these sources, Kenya is also implementing large wind farms such as Lake Turkana Farm. Kenya uses solar energy to generate electricity in rural areas that are off the grid. Kenya does not use any natural gas or coal to produce electricity. The downside of this is electricity is not reliable and there are frequent blackouts. From this graph, we can see that Kenya has about 6 times as much energy being produced as Senegal. A lot of this energy comes from oil, shown in green. Kenya also uses natural gas, in blue, as well as the developing hydro and geothermal technologies.
Now we will discuss the current work in China. China is still a developing country despite having big cities because of its plentiful rural areas. It is investing a lot of money into hydroelectric power and solar power because this country is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Between 2005 and 2020, China has planned to reduce emission by 40 to 45%. Because of China's work into becoming more renewable, its wind and solar prices are now competitive to oil and coal. China can be used as an example for other countries to follow. This chart shows the primary supply of energy in China. As can be seen, the primary source is coal, followed by oil. But in recent years, there is a small spike of geothermal, solar, and wind power, as can be seen in the orange above.
Due to its geographical location, Venezuela has immense amounts of oil and natural gas reserves. Venezuela's economy has been dependent on oil since the 1920s. Although Venezuela has the capacity to have large amounts of solar and wind energy generation, Venezuela only uses hydro as a renewable energy resource. From this graph, we can see that Venezuela produces more energy than the other third world countries we have talked about so far. Most of this energy comes from oil, followed by natural gas. A little bit of the energy comes from hydro, seen in purple, and a very small amount comes from biofuels at the top.
Morocco currently imports the majority of its energy supply due to its lack of resources. As stated previously in an earlier slide, 70% of its energy comes from fossil fuels. However, due to the fact Morocco has to import most of its supply, its government made a plan to move towards mostly renewable sources in order to gain some more independence and save money. Their goal is to be 52% renewable by 2030. This chart shows the primary sources of Morocco's energy. As can be seen, the majority of its energy comes from coal and oil. The hope that is in future years, these numbers will shrink and renewable energy sources will lead as the primary source. The projections for 2040 are given by Renewable Energy and Developing and Developed Nations Outlooks to 2040. The countries shown here are Kenya, Morocco, and South Africa. In the figure in the upper right corner, the United States is also shown in order to show comparison. It also lists out the projected energy consumption and the population with it. The left figure shows pie charts comparing the current status of the three countries to the hopefully future statistics. As one can see, there's a huge shift from coal and natural gas to renewable energy sources. The bottom right chart shows the breakdown of the projected energy sources for 2040 in megawatts. In Kenya and Morocco, the breakdown is entirely renewable, whereas in South Africa, some nuclear energy is planned to be used. If these countries keep to their goals, it is possible that they may be able to shift their use of fossil fuels and not contribute to future carbon emissions. In summary, we discussed the current statistics, why it matters, the development of renewable energy sources, some specific examples, and future projections. Thank you for your attention, and we hope you learned something.